Hi, I'm Derek Robinson. I'm a senior technical online course developer at InterSystems. And in this video, we're going to go over the Health Connect Cloud source control workflow. So to this point in the Health Connect Cloud source control course, you've learned a bit about the architecture, about protected branches and interface branches. We're going to recap all of that here, as well as the kind of process that someone like Sam or Alex, as interface engineers in the examples that we've gone through, we'll go through and create interface branches, do interface work, and get that all worked into the source control process. So to recap, really your Health Connect Cloud architecture consists of these two categories of assets, which is your GitLab branches and your Health Connect Cloud deployments. At the most high level, where you're looking at the organizational assets here and not the individual branches yet, you've got these main protected branches here for development, testing, and live or production. Each of these protected branches can only be modified by somebody with the appropriate permissions to accept merge requests and be able to make changes on those branches. Associated with those protected branches is a primary or protected namespace on each of your Health Connect deployments or Health Connect Cloud deployments. So each of these dev, test, and live deployments is one of the deployments running on AWS that's accessible through your InterSystems Cloud Services portal. So whatever, primary or protected namespace you end up naming as far as your naming convention goes, I've just indicated with a little star here. So each one of these deployments has that protected namespace that's going to be mapped to the protected branch, okay? So what happens whenever a new change is approved into one of these protected branches is that GitLab runners or CI/CD pipelines automatically deploy the code that was in that update that's been added to this protected branch and deploy that code according to the various mappings that you have set up to the protected namespace on the associated deployment. So anytime something new goes into the dev or development branch, the GitLab CI/CD pipeline will deploy those changes right to the dev deployment on its protected namespace. So as we go over this kind of high-level workflow, you might wonder, how do we ever get interface changes into the process if none of our interface engineers and developers can make changes directly on dev due to its protected nature? Well, that's where the process for an individual developer or engineer comes into play. So we have two examples throughout the course that we've been looking at, and that's Sam and Alex. And really, for the purposes of this video, you can consider both of them to be doing equivalent interface work. But throughout the online course on Health Connect Cloud Source Control, Sam is building an HL7 business service, and Alex is working on a routing rule that maybe requires a little bit more work and is not moving at the same pace that Sam is moving at. So what is the process for Sam to begin his interface work and get started to get his work into this workflow that is the Health Connect Cloud Source Control architecture? Well, the first thing he'll do is he will, on the dev deployment, he will create a new namespace. And so Sam has a personal namespace, and for that matter, Alex will as well. And so each developer or engineer in your organization can create a namespace that they will work in as their personal working environment. It doesn't need to be broken up by unit of work yet, because we're going to handle that via another asset here. So Sam creates a namespace, and what he will importantly need to do in the default source control workflow is make sure that his namespace is initially configured. He'll only need to do this once, but make sure it's initially configured for the source control settings with the embedded Git menu. This will do things like make sure that Sam's mappings are correct, like these CI/CD pipelines that we talk about, make sure that his other organizational settings are correct for the merges that are going to be created, or the default import that's going to happen from one of these primary branches here when he first creates a new namespace or new interface branch. And so all of those mappings can be referred to in documentation and discussed with your onboarding team. But basically, Sam and Alex both will make sure their namespace is configured initially with the proper embedded Git settings. Once that happens, now Sam can begin working, and the first thing that he'll want to make sure he does is to import from the live branch. So there's a button within the embedded Git menu in the UI where you can import all. So he'll import all and actually force that to import the latest from the live or production branch, deployment that is. And so what that will do is make sure that Sam is getting the latest copy of everything in his namespace before he begins working. Once he does that, now what Sam can do is he can actually, from the same namespace, create this interface branch, which we'll call interface branch 1. Now, interface branch 1 is going to be another branch in GitLab, but this one is not protected. Sam is able to make changes and commits to this branch without anyone else having to approve them. So as Sam does his work in his namespace, he makes changes, maybe builds an HL7 business service, and through the source control buttons in the UI, he can then sync those changes or sync the work he's done to this interface branch. So once he's done that, Sam now can say, all right, you know what? I'm ready to get this interface branch rolled into the source control workflow, to get this into the organizational protected branches that we have so that I can see how this looks against the other things that my colleagues have put into the dev deployment. And so then he will create a merge request to be able to merge the interface branch that he's created into the dev branch that is protected. And so only a maintainer can be able to approve that branch. Someone with the appropriate permissions can approve that merge request to merge this branch into the protected dev or development branch. Once that does happen, though, this CI/CD pipeline, which exists on all 3 levels, that will automatically deploy those changes into the dev deployment of Health Connect Cloud. And what Sam can then do is he can go right to the management portal up here, of the primary namespace. So from the namespace he's been working in, which is his Sam personal namespace, he can instead switch to whatever the protected namespace is, and it will be read-only. So that protected namespace is read-only for Sam and Alex and the others that are working on this. And they can go see in a read-only fashion their work that has been deployed to that protected namespace, right? So that's your preliminary testing can be done there in dev to really just see, some of the basics, make sure that it works, make sure it looks good. And once Sam is ready, he might be ready to say, we're ready to go to test with this now. And this is where there's a difference in some of the more conventional pipelines that have existed in both Health Connect Cloud and just other general architectures for other products, which is that we're not going to go all of dev merging into test and all of test merging into live or production. We're not doing this workflow. Instead, Sam will have preserved interface branch 1, and he now is going to come back here if there were no changes after his sort of initial smoke testing on the dev deployment. He will now do another merge request right into test. Okay? So he's preserving, and a maintainer will approve that, but he's preserving his branch, and now he's going from dev, he's going into test, and then the pipeline will deploy that code there to this read-only namespace as well, and he can actually run more thorough testing against everything else that has been cleared through dev and has already been rolled into test. So now you're doing a little bit more of the integration testing and seeing what else has actually made it through to the test deployment, and I can test everything about my HL7 business service in this environment. And then finally, as you can see, once it becomes time, the same interface branch will be promoted to live with, again, a maintainer approving that. And then only once things have gone all the way through into live and we're tested out and ready to go, again, on a read-only protected namespace in live, only at that time would it be appropriate for Sam to remove his interface 1 branch, because now the work has been completed through the whole workflow. This unit of work is done, and that interface branch can be removed. So revisiting Alex, though, for a moment, this is part of where we highlight the reason for going interface branch directly into each protected branch instead of having a workflow that flows from dev to test to live. Because if Alex made some changes to her routing rule, and that was being done on interface branch 2, well, let's say that she had merged that into dev around the same time that Sam did, right? And she made a merge request and that was approved. Well, now if that they're both in dev, you'd have to make sure that you were coordinated to move everything in dev up to test, right? You'd need to make sure that you had an all or nothing type of scenario, or you would need to start cherry picking commits from a source control standpoint to go from dev into test. And that's kind of the reason why we instead choose to go with this interface branch going directly into each protected level. That way the unit of work is isolated within that interface branch that Sam is working on, within the interface branch that Alex is working on, and any other unit of work that you'd like to make sure is isolated from others to be able to have that individual promotion of the work that's being done for that interface component, right? So that's kind of an overview of what you can understand to be the Health Connect Cloud source control workflow. There's a lot more that can go through with this. There's also variants in the course that will explain about using some code-based editing, as well as best practices for naming your components and kind of managing your branches as well within this overall architecture. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how the general process and workflow goes. And, it'll help you with building your interfaces in Health Connect Cloud.